Welcome to episode 9 of the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, what to watch and what to ignore in the upcoming 2023 elections, new House ratings after new maps in North Carolina and Alabama, and how many more candidates will drop out of the GOP presidential race before we finish recording this episode. Here we go. Hello, I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor of Inside Elections, and my favorite Halloween costume growing up was the Karate Kid.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin, reporter and analyst for Inside Elections, and my favorite Halloween costume growing up was French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte.
Hey everyone, I'm Erin Covey. I'm also a reporter and analyst for Inside Elections. And I had a lot of boring Halloween costumes over the years because I danced, and so I would usually just recycle whatever my recital costumes were. But when I was little, my mom made a Hershey Kiss costume that looked very realistic, and she put a lot of effort into it. So I'm going to have to say that was my favorite.
Well, and that's Erin. Actually, my mom made my Karate Kid costume, and I was Karate Kid multiple years because she put so much time and effort to it, and it was cool. It was very well done.
Yeah.
But Jacob, yours went a little different direction with Napoleon.
I know. Was that last year?
No, this was fourth grade. It gives you a sense of the kind of fourth grader I was. My mom also made my costume. I had the Napoleon hat made out of black construction paper. I had the epaulets, the sash, the whole deal. There is a photo out on my Twitter of fourth grade Jacob dressed up as Napoleon for enterprising listeners who want to go find it. But I think that ranks certainly at the top of my many costumes over the years.
Did it give you a complex?
No, I don't think the complex not included with that one.
Or maybe this is just an effort with the new Napoleon movie coming out. This is just like a crossover plea for a sponsorship, which we're not against. We're not against, but I could see this. Before we get into our three big stories, let's do some headlines. Jacob, what should folks not miss?
So Maryland Representative John Sarbanes is headed for the exits after 9 terms representing Annapolis and the Baltimore suburbs. The wonky Democrat, who was always very issues focused, passed up several opportunities to run for higher office, either Senate, like his father, the late Senator Paul Sarbanes, or governor on a few occasions. It's notable because not only is this an open seat for Congress and a safe Democratic seat that will see probably a large primary, but Maryland may well see significant turnover in its congressional delegation this cycle or over the next couple of years, with Senator Ben Cardin taking his leave at the end of this year. Congressman David Trone, who is an underdog to replace Cardin, could also be potentially leaving D.C. And then Representatives Dutch Ruppersberger and Steny Hoyer also at the tail end of their careers. So a big couple years for a state that does not see a significant amount of turnover historically.
Yeah, and open seats is kind of the theme here. Erin, what should folks not miss?
We had another House Democrat announce retirement this week. Earl Blumenauer, who has represented the Portland area for more than 3 decades, announced that he's retiring. Not a huge surprise, but this is probably going to lead to a pretty competitive primary on the Democratic side. This is one of the bluest seats in the country, and so the Democratic primary is going to decide who succeeds Blumenauer. And it's also going to be an interesting test of the strength of various progressive leaders, I think, particularly Pramila Jayapal, because her sister is preparing to run for this seat, but she's not going to be the only progressive in the race. State Representative Travis Nelson is also preparing to run, and there's a couple of other big names in the Portland area that are looking at running as well. So this is going to be a really interesting primary to watch.
and that will Blumenauer's exit will take there'll be a new leader of the Congressional Bike Caucus. I believe he's the head of that,
That's
and
right.
a
Founder
member
too.
and a member of the unofficial bow tie, I think, caucus. I don't know, depending on new members. I don't know if Jayapal's sister wears a bow tie or not. I'm not familiar, but we'll see.
We'll
How many
see.
members? Blumenauer, McHenry, Donald Payne, anyone
It's
else?
a small group. I think it's a
Yeah.
small table if they go out to
A few of
dinner.
the crowd.
Um, but in mine, Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, a Democrat or DFLer, announced his primary challenge to President Joe Biden. What's interesting about this, I don't think Phillips' primary challenge is going to go very far. We've actually kind of had a test run starting at the beginning of August when Phillips started talking about this potential scenario. But I'm not considering this an open seat quite yet because the filing deadline for in Minnesota is early June, and Phillips could take this. Could take this presidential run, for a few weeks or even a few months, and then fall back to running for reelection. There is another candidate in the race, and we'll see how the primary turns out and how many people he angers in that process. But right now, I believe we have, not counting Phillips, I think there are 21 open seats right now, and we're still less than average. The average is 34, but what we've seen is that filing deadlines are coming up. It looks like Texas Republican Kay Granger is not running for reelection. I think one of the reasons why we're getting that announcement is because the Texas filing deadline is coming up in December. So we're going to start to see these members have to make real decisions about their futures. The Inside Elections podcast is sponsored by George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management, or GSPM. The GSPM program offers master's degrees in legislative affairs and political management with in-person and online class schedules designed for the working professional. I got to say, for me, it was the complete package. I knew I wanted to get a master's degree, and GSPM was more practical than an advanced degree in political science. The class schedule allowed me to keep my full-time job. I met a lot of great fellow students, both Republicans and Democrats, that I would end up working with professionally later on down the line. So it was the right program for me. Just click on the link, get more information, and see if GSPM is the right program for you. First up, let's talk about the 2023 elections, including the fight for the Virginia Assembly. Now, for those of you listening that are outside the Washington, D.C. area, sometimes Virginia's elections get a disproportionate amount of attention because a lot of D.C. reporters see the ads from the Virginia race in the Washington, D.C. market. Here are a couple examples.
I'm Russet Perry. For 10 years, I carried this badge as a prosecutor, putting child molesters and murderers behind bars. Juan Pablo Segura wants to put doctors behind bars by criminalizing abortions. He's wrong. Women and doctors who provide reproductive care aren't criminals.
Supported by Defund the Police radicals, Russet Perry's office pushed to bond out domestic abusers. The result?
Released on an unsecured bond, showing up at his wife's home and bludgeoning her with a hammer.
Perry's radical ideology jeopardizes your safety. We've had enough.
That's from a hot race for the state Senate in Loudoun and Fauquier counties in the Washington, D.C. suburbs and exurbs, but there are also races for governor in Kentucky and Mississippi, key ballot measures in Ohio, and more. And since these are actual voters casting real ballots, there's going to be a lot of attention on these 2023 races. So, Jacob, first of all, what are you watching in these upcoming elections?
Well, the marquee legislative fight is definitely for control of the Virginia State House and State Senate. Both are up for grabs. Both are very evenly divided. Of course, Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, would have full control of the state if Republicans were able to flip the Virginia State Senate. If Democrats can win back the state house, that would be a sign of strength there. I think it's been really interesting to see the two parties clash over abortion. One of the, if not the top selling point for Virginia Democrats has been if Republicans get full control of the state house, and the state Senate, then they will pass a restrictive abortion law. Republicans are still struggling to find a message on abortion that appeals to the kind of suburban voters, and really even kind of voters of all swaths, who are skeptical of the more strict pro-life stances that a lot of the politicians have. So Governor Youngkin has endorsed a 15-week ban, but Democrats are trying to make the case that they wouldn't stop there necessarily if given full control. And it'll be interesting to see how effective that is in a lot of these places that vote for Biden at the top of the ticket, but still might vote for Republicans down ballot.
Yeah, and abortion is also a really key issue in Ohio next month, because issue 1 is going to be on the ballot, which would codify abortion rights in the state. And currently, polling that I have seen shows the issue has around 60% support, but not all of this polling uses the actual same phrasing as the issue will be on the ballot. So it's kind of unclear how much credit to give to those polls. But I think, the success or failure of this issue will probably energize either party ahead of the Senate race in Ohio, which is going to be one of the most decisive races in determining control of the Senate in 2024. And if issue 1 passes, that'll give Democrats a burst of energy, I'm sure. And then regardless, I think the Republican primary for the Ohio Senate race has kind of been a little delayed because of all the focus on issue 1. So we're probably going to see that race start to heat up once this is decided.
Yeah, to me, one of the big takeaways or things to watch in 2023 is the messaging back and forth, and we'll have to listen after these elections are over. I've often said we have to listen to what the politicians think happened in these elections, even if it's different than what actually happened, because what they think happened is going to drive their future behavior. For example, if Ohio, if the issue 1 passes and it passes, by a large margin, what lessons do both parties take from that? It'll probably embolden Democrats and cause Republicans to again think about how they're going to respond. But there are other issues. The Kentucky governor's race is going to be huge, not just because it's electing the chief officer of a state, but because you're seeing Democrats attacking Republicans on abortion access and attacking Daniel Cameron, the state attorney general, on abortion access. You're seeing Republicans attack Governor Andy Beshear on crime and safety issues. And even at the end, Republicans are just going all in and tying Beshear to Biden, which should work in a state like Kentucky. But if that anchor, if Biden isn't the anchor to Beshear, as much as what Republicans thought, then that could be a sign that just connecting a Democratic politician to Biden it's just not that simple, and Republicans are going to have to get more creative. What could be a result that could be a mirage, or something that could be not necessarily tell us much about what will happen in 2024?
This is not technically what's happening next month, but I think the results of the Louisiana governor's race, no one should be reading larger narratives into those. Louisiana is already a weird state. For those of you who are familiar with it, and the way its politics works are kind of weird, and so that already makes it a bit of an outlier. But it's also a state where, again, Bell Edwards, the current governor who is term limited, was probably one of the few Democrats who could have even had a shot at winning this race. And because he wasn't on the ballot, a lot of Democrats were super pessimistic that they would be able to hold the seat. And so Jeff Landry, who was the Republican attorney general and was the leading Republican candidate in this race, who won the jungle primary outright. So now he's poised to succeed Bell Edwards. He was always the favorite to win. And I don't think these results surprise anyone. And it really shouldn't say anything about the strength of the larger Republican Party going into these later 2023 races and 2024.
There's a danger here if Governor Beshear loses in Kentucky and Tate Reeves wins in Mississippi. If Republicans win both of those states, you will see a lot of, what does this mean for Democrats? Are Democrats toast? When in reality, these are two very Republican states that happen to have competitive elections, but not because of anything to do with the national political environment. And they have everything to do with the specific candidates who are running there. And so, obviously, we see Governor Bashir as a slight favorite. But I want to emphasize the slight there, right? I think the best a Democrat can do in Kentucky these days is probably about 52%. That's the kind of narrow margin that, if the weather doesn't cooperate for him on election day, that could be the difference. So I do think that's important to remember, that we're talking about, in those governor's races at least, and I'd include Louisiana here too, even though it's already happened, some of the most Republican states in the country. And to keep that in mind when trying to extrapolate based on local results or state level results trends for national elections.
Yeah, and I think we saw a lot of this in 2021 after Youngkin won the Virginia governor's race. That is obviously a relatively more competitive state than all of these other states that have governors up for re-election. And so, again, not maybe as much of a surprise as it should have, as it came off to a lot of folks who were caught off guard by his success. But it also just showed that a lot of the specific messaging that propelled him to victory did not end up being as salient in 2022 as a lot of Republicans were expecting, because other issues had come to the forefront. This was pre-Dobbs, and this was like much further along from the pandemic and all of the school closures. And so you can't put too much faith in one particular line of messaging, because we don't know what the environment is going to be in 2024.
Right. And that if Republicans do well in Virginia in this year's legislative races, there's going to be another Youngkin boomlet. And it's not, first of all, filing deadlines. We're already approaching filing deadlines, but it's not going to force other Republican candidates out of the race, right? I mean, Nikki Haley is not just going to step aside and say, "Oh, okay, Glenn Youngkin, you won, you managed to win your own state senate. I'm out of the presidential race." It's just not gonna happen. So, but we're trying to get ahead of how far the narrative is going to get out of hand, potentially, depending on what happens here in next week.
Yeah, I think the only thing Glenn Youngkin really has over the non-Trump Republican field, is that he's not running for president right now. So he looks a lot more attractive because he's not in the fray. He's above the fray right now, and it's not going to happen. But the minute he were to get into the presidential race, he would just be another guy running for president, in the same way that all these guys and one lady are just non-Trump politicians trying to, stake a claim in the primary.
Yeah, and he's never had to actually win a real primary either. So yeah, people forget that as well.
Yeah, so I think it's the backup quarterback always looks good when the starting quarterback isn't doing well. Well, before we get to 2024, there are actually there's other 2023 news that is happening that will impact next year's elections. There are new maps over the last few weeks in Alabama and North Carolina that are going to be critical in their impact on the fight for the House majority. New districts have caused some incumbents to make decisions whether they're going to run against a colleague or maybe even run for another office.
Got some news for you. A group of politicians in North Carolina just redrew my congressional district to take me out. They're going to replace me with one of their political allies. That's political corruption, and I've got news for them. I'm running for Attorney General, and I'm going to use that job to go after political corruption.
That was Jeff Jackson, a Democratic congressman in North Carolina who just got a newly drawn, very Republican seat after Republicans passed that new map. Erin, walk us through the impact that the maps in Alabama and North Carolina are going to have, the net gain and loss of seats in the fight for the majority.
Right. So we have had quite a bit of redistricting news over the past couple of weeks, not just in these two states, but in a couple of other states with pending redistricting cases. But in North Carolina, this is going to be one of the most consequential states, because the Republican-controlled state legislature just drew a new congressional map that will basically force 3 current Democratic members of Congress out of their seats. So currently, the delegation is split evenly between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans control 7 seats. Democrats control the other 7 seats in North Carolina. But under this new map, Republicans are poised to control 10 seats, maybe 11 seats, and Democrats will be left with only 3 or 4 seats. So this is obviously going to affect the reelection prospects of these 3 Democratic Congress members, who are Jeff Jackson, who we just heard in the previous clip, who's running for Attorney General now, and then Kathy Manning and Wiley Nickel, neither of which have fully disclosed their 2024 plans. And then Don Davis, who currently represents a Democratic-leaning district that is a little competitive, is now in a district that we have rated as a pure toss-up because Biden only won this seat by about 1.5 points, and this is now going to be one of the most competitive races in the country probably next year. And then in Alabama, we also have a new map there. So their current map was thrown out by courts for allegedly violating the Voting Rights Act. And the new court-drawn map will allow Democrats to flip a second seat in Alabama. So currently, Democrats control only 1 seat out of Alabama's 7 seats. This new map would allow them to flip a second seat. The second seat has already drawn a lot of interest from Democrats. And this case in Alabama could affect some other states down the line. But right now, if you're looking at just North Carolina and Alabama, Republicans are poised to net 2 seats due to redistricting alone.
And what other maps could change this cycle ahead of next year?
So Georgia may be the most likely to change because a federal judge there just threw out their current congressional map, also alleging that it violated the Voting Rights Act. And the Republican governor, Brian Kemp, has ordered a special session to start after Thanksgiving to draw a new map. Now, it's not totally certain that a new map that complies with the court order would necessarily result in a Democratic pickup here, just because the geography of the state is a little different than Alabama. But there's a pretty good chance that Democrats will be able to flip a seat in Georgia as well. And then maybe in Louisiana too, which again also has a Voting Rights Act case that is ongoing there. And we're not going to see results from that until next year, which is when the ruling is expected on that case. But from those 2 states alone, Democrats could net 2 more seats, which would mean that redistricting was a wash, except that in New York, there's also a pending case there, which could affect as many as 6 Republicans who are up for re-election next year. So it could end up being that Democrats end up making gains from redistricting alone. But right now, Republicans look like they have a slight edge.
And Jacob, I think we have a mid-November trial date for New York. Is that right?
Yeah, so the New York Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State, is scheduled to hear that redistricting case on November 15th. Democrats won at the intermediate level, but it is up in the air. The New York Court of Appeals has a new composition since the last time they heard this case last year when they ruled in Republicans' favor. There is a new Democratic appointed judge on the court. Nobody really knows how it's going to shake out, but if Democrats do win that case, they will most likely at the end of another long and kind of torturous process get an opportunity to redraw the map, potentially giving them an advantage in any number of seats across the state that they lost last cycle.
But the key takeaway is that there are 6 Republicans that are already vulnerable that could just be more vulnerable with a redraw.
Yeah, I think that the reason why there are so many Republicans in New York right now is because they were able to extend so far into Democratic-leaning territory already. And so the 6 vulnerable members will remain the 6 vulnerable members, regardless of whether they redraw the lines or not. It's just a question of just how vulnerable any of them will be next year.
Yeah, and one of the things, if let's say there is a new map, and we get to the post-election, and we're trying to think, what impact did redistricting have on this election cycle? Will we count, if Mike Lawler loses, or Anthony D'Esposito loses, or Brandon Williams loses? I mean, that district's a little bit further away from the city, but will it be because of redistricting, or will it just be kind of in the overall wash of the cycle?
think it depends on the margin, right? I mean, D'Esposito is sitting in a district that Biden won by 14 points. I don't think he's a bad example because I don't think they're going to redraw his district significantly. But let's take Nick LaLotta, who's in the first district. Biden won that by maybe 0.5% in 2020. It's very easy, very straightforward for Democrats to redraw that district to be significantly more Democratic, something closer to a Biden +8 or Biden +9. If we get to 2024 and LaLotta loses re-election by 2 points in a redrawn district, I think it's fair to say redistricting probably caused him to lose. If he loses by 15 points in a seat that they only redrew to be a Biden +8, then, I think it's a more complicated question.
Yeah, and we should also, when we're talking about open seats, that this cycle, I think one of the reasons why there are fewer retirements and we're less than average is because we were just coming out of a redistricting cycle. Erin, I think you made this point either on a previous podcast or a webinar or so that we had, that members have already had to make tough decisions about what they're doing based on their new districts that were given to them before the 2022 elections. And so because those decisions have already took place last cycle, there are fewer that are in the same boat that Kathy Manning is in right now, or Wiley Nickel is in right now, because we've already gone through that exercise.
Yeah. And for folks who have been in Congress a while, a redistricting cycle is a more natural time to decide to retire because they're already probably going to have to represent a at least slightly different version of their current district, if not significantly different.
Well, looking ahead to 2024, shifting a bit from the House and the Senate, I don't know if you've heard that there's a presidential election going on. And that presidential field changed a bit after Vice President Mike Pence dropped out of the race.
So after much prayer and deliberation, I have decided to suspend my campaign for president effective today.
I've been wrong about many things in life, but I've been right all along that Pence had no lane or no path in this race, and that finally came to fruition. It's almost more remarkable that Pence dropping out of the race has very little impact on the race that he leaves behind. I mean, where is his 3% going to go in this race? But my question to both of you: who's going to drop out next, and will it matter in this presidential nominating contest?
Hutchinson, probably.
Is he still in the race? I didn't even know.
Yeah, I don't think he made the debate stage, so I don't think that'll matter that much. But realistically, probably someone like him, or maybe Burgum. That would make the most sense. I think it's all going to kind of happen all at once, though, with at least like the folks who are not Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. Maybe Tim Scott.
I saw Hutchinson's campaign manager just left his campaign and kind of publicly said that he left because he didn't see a path forward for him as a viable candidate.
Which, did he see a path forward earlier? I don't know.
Before, maybe. I don't know. Honestly, I mean, I think at this point, if you're Tim Scott, all of the warning signs have been flashing for a little while now. I mean, his super PAC went off the air, said that they were going to recommit resources to Iowa. There have been all these stories about a frustration with Larry Ellison, the billionaire Oracle founder, who talked such a big game earlier in the cycle about bankrolling Scott's candidacy, and he seems to have cut off his giving as well. I think they're focusing tremendously on Iowa, which is never a great sign. And they're not seeing very much results. They had pulled themselves into third place, really almost a tie for second place over the summer, and have since fallen back down. I saw a poll the other day that had him at 5% in his home state of South Carolina. This is a guy who could still have a very long and fruitful future in the Republican Party, in the Senate. He could run for president in 25 years and be, the same age as Joe Biden is now, right? I mean, there's no reason why he has to spend all of his money and all of his political capital on a presidential run now when it's become clear that he's not the number 2 option. He's not even really the number 3 option now that Nikki Haley has picked up some steam. So I wouldn't be surprised if he cuts his losses on the early side and gets out of this race.
Yeah, it almost feels to me like everyone kind of overestimated what his ceiling would be because he's just so popular in DC and is very well liked within the Senate Republican conference and is just a likable kind of guy. And so folks assumed that would maybe translate to success on the campaign trail and being like the alternative to DeSantis or overtaking DeSantis. But instead, Nikki Haley's kind of in that position now.
And what is the risk, do you think? I mean, I was going to ask whether you all think who's going to drop out first between Tim Scott and Governor Ron DeSantis. It sounds like you might think Scott, but Jacob, as you were talking about looking ahead, what is a better play if you want to run for something down the line? Sort of get out early, or push forward and see how far you can get it into go into the actual primary calendar with voters actually voting.
I think that we've seen both historically, right, to varying degrees of success, right? Hillary Clinton stood, strong throughout the entire 2008 primary, was passed over for VP, of course, but got that Secretary of State position, and then was first in line in 2016 after the Obama years. Bernie Sanders stuck it out all the way in the 2016 primary, took it to the convention, not really, but technically speaking. And then, that was clearly in anticipation of running again if he needed to in 2020, where he didn't win the nomination. I think it depends on the candidate, and it depends what they think they can get out of it, right? If you think you're going to get a plum administration spot, either vice president or something else that will keep you in the mix for the next 4 or 8 years, you might want to drop out early, right? Because you want to endear yourself to the person who's going to win the nomination, in this case, Trump. I think it's highly unlikely that Ron DeSantis is going to get a job in the next Trump administration. I would be, stranger things have happened, but I would be shocked if that's the case. So I think that removes a bit of an incentive for him to drop out early. I also think, he's still got that super PAC with $80 million or so in it. And that makes it very easy to continue running a campaign because the super PAC is really the one that's paying for everything, right? DeSantis can run kind of a skeleton operation for a very long time. We saw in 2012, Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum both basically run entire campaigns structured around one billionaire who was funding them and allowing them to go far deeper into that race than if they had to fundraise themselves. So I wouldn't be surprised if DeSantis sticks it out for a lot longer, even as it's becoming clearer and clearer that he's not in a position to win.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that timing matters, and it's just hard to predict. I mean, I remember the 2015, 2016 days, the talk about Senator Marco Rubio, and there was a sense that, all right, Trump was ascendant, he was rising, sort of Republicans like, let's give Trump his moment, but we know Rubio's going to be president one day. Like he was the rising star, and that just, I don't think he's considered that anymore. I mean, we're years away from those moments, but just sentiment around him or his profile has changed. I also wanted to bring up the context of Iowa, and this time back in the 2015-2016 race, that this was the moment where Ted Cruz was starting his ascent in Iowa all the way up to what I believe was a 28% victory in Iowa. And you can say, oh, well, Nikki Haley is getting, she's rising in Iowa and in the low 20s and getting close. But the difference is that you have Trump at 50+%. Like it's just a very, very different race. And if Nikki Haley's trying to, make that Ted Cruz momentum in Iowa, it's a completely different race with basically an incumbent that she's trying to topple. But let's move on. And finally, our Look What I Found segment, where we talk about things we've recently seen, whether it be sports, politics, pop culture. It doesn't have to be anything specific, just something we found. Erin, what did you find?
So for my birthday this year, my sister got me a record from this artist named Leve, who I was sort of familiar with. I know a couple of her songs, but hadn't really like gotten into her before. But my sister thought I would like her. And then the next day, one of my friends who works at NPR texted me and asked me if I wanted to go to her tiny desk. So I went to that yesterday, which was a lot of fun. And I think I can say I'm a fan now. She's like a modern jazz singer, kind of in like the mid-century style. And yeah, she's really good. She's super young. I think she's maybe 23 or 24 years old, but incredibly talented. And yeah, would recommend that y'all check her out.
That's amazing. Was there a good crowd at the Tiny Desk recording?
No, I mean it's hard because NPR is mostly remote these days, it seems like. And so when I worked there, we were all working in person. And so some tiny desks were super busy. But this one was, I don't know, not that crowded.
What was the best one you got to go to?
Oh, I saw Taylor Swift when she did hers, and that was crazy. That one you had to, it was like a lottery system because there was so much demand within the NPR headquarters.
And what was
wow.
what was the name internally? Wasn't there a code name or something that was on the list of upcoming Tiny Desk, the schedule or something? But I can't remember what the code name for Taylor Swift was.
I don't remember. I do remember getting the email though, because I was working on the fourth floor of the newsroom at the time, and you could hear a collective gasp like rise up from the newsroom as the email like popped into all of our inboxes. But
I bet
yeah,
the code name
that
was
a
Travis
fun time.
Kelce. It was like
They somehow knew.
Jacob, what did you find?
So I am currently working my way through a novel called I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Maki. It is a mystery thriller murder novel about a woman who goes back to her fancy New Hampshire prep school several decades after graduating and gets kind of roped into an investigation trying to solve the murder of her former roommate back in the 1990s. I'm only about a third of the way through, but so far I'm really enjoying it. I have been on a bit of a thriller and mystery kick lately, and this is a really great kind of modern addition to that genre for sure.
Yet more bedtime reading for my kids, it sounds like. Do you have
exactly? Yeah.
Do you have a book goal every year that you want to read a certain number of books, or do you just take them as they come?
No, I'm not that regimented. I just always try to be reading something. And, I try and alternate fiction and nonfiction because the fiction propels me into the next book. I have to, keep a little variety in order to keep up the cycle. But I don't set a goal or anything like that.
And does Twitter or X, does that count as reading fiction or nonfiction? What is that?
Well, I actually found this book through Twitter because a couple writers that I already followed were saying very good things about it. So I followed Rebecca and I saw the book, and I waited about 3 or 4 months to get it off of hold at the DC Public Library, my favorite place. And so now I have about 3 weeks to read it before I have to return it because there's a long line of people after me also interested in checking it out.
I'm pretty sure you're on the unpaid PR team for the DC Public Library. I haven't confirmed it yet.
I love them. I'm annoyed because I didn't open the app for like 3 days, and one of my books that I was reading got automatically returned because I forgot to renew it.
Oh,
so
no.
Currently, I'm a little anti them, but the relationship will
heal. Maybe you'll get back together. Is that
yeah, we'll see.
My bad attempt at a Taylor Swift reference. I found that the Dallas Dragons defeated their rival Central Panthers 56-12 in Oregon's 6th congressional district, Mid-Willamette Valley district. The Dragons are going to start the playoffs coming up this weekend against the Thurston Colts down 99W, which is in Oregon's 4th district in Springfield, Oregon. So go Dragons. That's my pitch. That's my pitch there.
Nathan, if they make the championships, are you going to travel back?
Oh man, it would be tough. I think it usually falls around Thanksgiving, which might cause some family. My family out there would be happy. I don't know about my family here, but we'll see. It would be tempting, but it's gonna be there's some tough. It'll be a tough road if they get there. It'll be they definitely earned it. And that's all the time we have. We discussed what to watch in the upcoming 2023 elections, how the new maps in North Carolina and Alabama will impact the fight for the House, and the ongoing saga of the Republican presidential primary. Thank you for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to those complex elections. Please go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter. We have individual subscriptions as well as group packages that are tailored to help boost association and corporate PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast. Do all the things that you're supposed to do. Give us a rating, leave a comment, click thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Ralph Macchio. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.